So if the TTB had their way, which is the way it's supposed to be, once a bourbon comes out of its original barrel, right? It's if it comes out of the barrel and you bottle it, technically that's bourbon. But if you take it out of the barrel and then re-barrel it, by law, technically it's not bourbon.
Right.
But the TTB doesn't really.
And do they kind of let this particular aspect of the spirit slide?
They kind of let it slide. So when you see a toasted bourbon or a double barreled or a finished, like the Angels you were just looking at, which is a very expensive bottle.
A very expensive
finished
bottle.
in port casks or Mizunara casks or cognac casks or whatever. Technically, that's no longer bourbon. But they kind of let it slide. Right, so it's still technically, in my humble opinion, it's still bourbon, but it's just finished in a way that's a little bit different than just straight out of the cask.
Sure.
So to try to make it simple, when you see something like the Elijah Craig Toasted, or a Trails End 10, or
Old Forester
1910, or a Peerless Double Oak, so that's a common phrase you'll see. Double oaked. And what does that mean? That means they aged it in one barrel, so it still fits the requirements of bourbon, right? So it stayed in the original barrel with all the rules that goes with it. 51% corn, yada, 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 right? Brand new charter oak barrels. So once it ages in there, a lot of the companies that will make whiskey, make bourbon in particular, they'll then just add a little flair to it, right? So you've got companies like Barrel King, you've got companies like the Whiskey Blendery up in McKinney, where they're taking whiskey that has been aged in a barrel, like 53-gallon charred oak barrels, and then they'll basically put them in another barrel to get extra flavor, right? And that makes something new.
Is that why toasted barrels or double oaked is typically a more expensive bottle because it's a more involved process?
Yes, sir, 100%. Because if you age something for 4 to 6 years in a normal 53-gallon barrel, and then you then take said whiskey and then put it in another barrel for anywhere from, with the Trails End for 4 months with the Gary Oak that we've talked about before, or the Angels, which is a port finished, so they take port barrels and then add the bourbon to that, right? Or, just different offerings, they'll char and toast their barrels differently. And then they will then age them in there anywhere from, 4 months to 18 months to 24 months. So anytime you get a whiskey that's sitting in a secondary barrel for an additional amount of time, there's costs involved with that.
And I believe a friend of yours asked, what is the difference between regular bourbon and these offerings?
Correct. So a buddy from college got in touch with me and asked me what the difference between a toasted and a double barrel or a double oak is. And basically it's the exact same thing, right? There's just, in the whiskey world, there's different levels of it. So when I worked at the store I worked at, you could go to something like an Elijah Craig Toasted, which is on the lighter side of the double barreling, which means that it spent less time in the secondary barrel than it did in the first barrel, right? And then you can get into like a Old Forester 1910, which typically sits around 6 months in a secondary barrel, right? Now they may or may not, and that's something in the industry that they do. They'll take an old barrel that they had sitting around, and they can either re-char it, re-toast it, right? So you've got the original barrel that's full of, because there's probably 2.5 gallons of whiskey in a used barrel, just in the wood itself. So then when they re-toast it or they re-char it, they're just kind of recharging the barrel, and then they add, the bourbon or the rye, the distillate, into the barrel, and then they let it sit, typically in the 1910, for the Old Forester, it's typically 6 months.
Really?
Yep. The Woodford Double Oak is typically about a year. So they'll let it sit for an extra year. So that's going to add to the price because it has to sit for an extra year. And if that distillate's not hitting the market,
where in the rick house does it sit?
it depends on the company. It really just depends. You know, some of these rick houses are, 8 stories tall. So they've got it figured out to where what they're trying to get out of it, they might put it on the low floors, they might put it in the middle, they might put it on the high floors. It just depends on the yield that they're looking to get and the consistency that they're trying to get out of it. So when you see that, and that's where having somebody relatively knowledgeable at the storyboard that you frequent, hopefully they can explain that to you, the difference between a Trails N10, which we've talked about before, is a 4-month double barreling of Gary Oak, which is Pacific Northwest, compared to like an Old Forester or a Elijah Craig
Or the Woodford.
or the Woodford.
Speaking of which, I believe that the Woodford is what you have poured into this glass.
Yep, we poured the Woodford.
In general, what is going to be the flavor profile differences in, oak finished whiskey?
So yeah, the difference with a double barrel product is because you're putting it into a used barrel, you're going to get a little more. If you've ever had like a barrel aged stout, you're going to get, you're going to get deeper flavors, right? So you're going to get more sugar, more oak. Sometimes I get figs.
Does that mean it will be sweeter or?
Yeah, typically it's going to be a sweeter product. So for a lot of people, like the double oak's great because it's just so sweet and there's just so much sugar in it.
Whereas for some people, they shy away from Woodford Reserve Double Oak because it's too sweet.
Right, and so
It's too rich.
we've talked about it before, where the first time I tried the double oak, I had only had regular Woodford, and when I tried it, I didn't like it. Like it was just a different monster.
It's very jammy, at
Right.
least on the nose.
Yeah, very jammy, very dark fruit. You said you can get figs, you can get dates, you can get brown like deep, dark, burnt brown sugar. Like it's super interesting, and it fits, in that world. But if you've never experienced that world, it's just a little bit different. But once you get your palate adjusted to it, you're like, holy crap, like this is really good. And so like with the Angels in particular, so most of what we've got on here is just double oaked white American oak barrels, right?
Whereas Angels Envy, even their regular offerings, they're finished in port cask.
Correct. So it's a wine cask from France. And what it does is when you get those barrels, you throw the bourbon in there and it sucks the port or it sucks the old whiskey out of the oak staves in the barrels, right? Which is super interesting. And they can do it with port casks, with cognac casks, with, sherry, with Mizunara oak. I mean, really it doesn't matter as long as it's the Amburana, which a lot of people, when they try Amburana finished products, is like a cinnamon toast crunch flavor.
Really?
Yeah, where it's kind of bready but very cinnamony because that's what Amburana is. Like that's just the type of wood. Those are the flavors that it puts into the whiskey. So they're all super interesting and they're all very different based on what the distillery wants and the product they want to put out there. So you can have an Elijah Craig Toasted, which is this guy here, and this is very light on the notes that we're getting out of the Woodford Double Oak, right? Where the Old Forester and the Woodford, because they're sister distilleries, are owned by Brown-Forman, right? So they're going to have similar flavor profiles, where the Trails End coming out of Oregon is going to be wildly different because of the type of oak that they use up there, which is going to be different from a Peerless Double Oaked, which is going to be different from an Angel's Envy, or which is going to be different from any other toasted or double oaked product that you're going to find. So let's try it and see what you think. So, skull, buddy.
To your health. It's been years since I've had Woodford Double Oak. That's just as good as I remember it.
Yeah, so what I used to tell people at the store I worked at,
Wow.
to me that's fat kid whiskey.
Yes, it is.
That's breakfast, right? And
it's like when you go to the field in San Diego, California.
Yeah.
And you have your breakfast Guinness.
Have a Guinness for breakfast. Absolutely. So the reason we haven't owned one of these, to be completely honest, is that Sunday morning. That's Sunday morning breakfast whiskey.
Right, serving it with your Sunday bacon
with
the brown sugar.
With the Sunday bacon, absolutely. It's just sweet, it's dark, it's rich. And for a lot of people, this wouldn't be like a bad intro into bourbon just because of the sweetness.
It's not as harsh.
Because of the richness. You don't have a huge flavor drift. You don't have a bunch of high rye spice. You don't have a bunch of weird eclectic flavors that
weird corn notes.
Yeah, that whiskey dorks like me love. It's like, show me what's different. Like the Woodford Double Oak in particular is just...
It's a straight shooter.
It's consistent. And it's sweet, and it's dark, and it's rich, and it's just so good that it's really tough to beat. Now, I don't know what the proof is. I believe it's probably 94.
Because probably.
Yep, 45.2, so...
It's like 90-ish.
You do the math. 90
Man,
points.
I mean, we've complained about Woodford having this problem before, that they had no offerings in between 90.4 and 115 if you have the opportunity to purchase the Masters collection.
Yeah, or the highest one I've got was at 126.3. Like that's a proofy gal. 118, 119, 128. So
a thought just came to mind. If we were smart, we would have done a review of the regular Woodford Reserve.
Well,
when the Kentucky Derby happens, because Woodford Reserve has historically been the sponsor of the
Yeah.
Kentucky Derby.
But the point is Woodford's good at the proof that it's at.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why, like at the store I used to tell people, like Woodford is just your straight down the middle Kentucky bourbon. The proof's not too high. It hits all the right flavor profiles.
It doesn't have as heavy of a cherry note, like a medicinal cherry note,
Sure.
as Old Forester 86 or 100 would have.
Sure, and some people with the Old Foresters, they get, banana notes and stuff like that, and so...
That's just funny. I've heard that many a time, but I've never, ever gotten it.
I don't either, but...
I get banana in, what is it, Jack Daniels?
Jack Daniels, for sure, but yeah, I don't get it in the Old Forester in particular, but... but that's the beauty about everybody's palate, is it's different for everybody. So some people will get different notes. I had a guy one time at the store who was talking about ryes, and he got a dill note. And I'm like, dill? I'd heard about that, but I never got one. And his buddies made fun of him, and I'm like, screw those guys, dude. I'm like, but then again, I had heard about like pine needles. And I think, I might have mentioned that before.
It was
the Hard Truth.
Yeah, Hard Truth.
The double oak.
Henry Snipes.
Right.
Yeah, that had heavy pine needles.
Right. And the first time I drank it, we drank it together, and I was like, holy crap, this tastes like a pine tree.
This tastes like I face planted into a bunch of pine needles.
Yeah, it was wild, but that was the first one I got it on. So everybody's palate's going to be different. These are all great representatives of what a double barrel can do, and there are some distilleries like High West. What else do we have? I don't really know.
Yeah, High West.
But I'm just thinking like double barreling stuff.
Double barrel. I mean, you have.
But High West is a big one. Like their ryes are phenomenal.
I mean, Maker's Mark 46 is technically.
That's the hard part, because there becomes a line where, if you take a product out of the original barrel and then re-barrel it, there are some arguments that, that's going to be a lot different than if you just have a barrel that's full of whiskey and then you insert, wood spirals, which is what Maker's does.
Yes.
Right. So they take.
I think that school of thought is generally correct.
Well, and I think if you go by the law, Maker's actually, if you add wood staves to the original barrel, it's still technically classified as a bourbon, right? But because the TTB doesn't really, hold, people to the...
I don't think the TTB has gone to the office in a while.
They may not. They may be working from home. But Maker's actually inserts...
Is Maker's finished product the rye that you have over there?
Yeah, Yeah, it's a toasted barrel
That's
finish.
a toasted barrel finish.
Yeah.
And I think the only other one that comes off the top of my head is Sagamore.
Sagamore does a lot, like with their double oak.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, which is
delicious.
Amazing. Yeah, it's amazing.
I believe you once said that Sagamore is akin to a Midwinter Night's Dram from High West, but you can actually find it.
One of the Sagamores is, yeah, absolutely.
I believe it's the Sagamore Spirit Double Oaked.
I'm not sure. It might be the port finish.
The port finish?
It
Okay,
might
that
be,
would make sense.
It might be the port finish because I think Midwinter's is
Midwinter's always has a little
Portland
port
cognac finish. Yeah. But it's, but that's the thing. If you can find these bottles, they're super good and they're super interesting.
Of course, you're going to pay a little more.
A little more, just because, especially with rye is a more expensive grain. And then once you double barrel it, you just got to figure from a
business standpoint, they're sitting on that juice for a long.
They're sitting on it, depending how long, whether it's 4 months, 6 months, a year and a half. I think the Woodford, we don't have it because I refuse to pay the price for it. But
the Woodford double
oak, I think that's close to 2 years, and it's sat in secondary barrels.
How much are they asking on the secondary market?
I don't know secondary. I just know retail is almost like $200, if not $200.
And still 90.4 proof.
And it's still 90.4 proof. But then, I mean, to be fair, when you're getting into that type of secondary influence, or you're getting into like with the Elijah Craig 18s or something like that, where you have that much time in a barrel, you almost have to proof it down to make it drinkable. Right? Because
I do understand.
Because if you don't, then like you've mentioned before, then for me in particular, and for you with the Knob,
it tastes like you're biting on it.
The Knob Creek 15, it tastes like you just drank some whiskey and chewed on a piece of wood. And some people love it.
Some people are all about that.
Yeah, and a lot of people aren't, but they'll buy it because it's because of the age statement and add it to their collection or whatever. So. But yeah, these are all great versions of the same process. And once you understand what the process is,
which is you finish aging whiskey and you dump it in some other barrel.
Correct. Once it comes to the right age. And now, to be fair, and that's one of the secrets in the whiskey industry, is you can take young whiskeys that may not be good enough to sell on their own.
Like it'll taste too effervescent, it'll be too...
Yeah, or it just
bland.
doesn't work. And so you can blend those barrels together to make something that's sort of decent. And then you can put it in a finishing barrel. And because it takes on the barrel that it is now sitting in, it then makes a product that you can sell.
Port casks are really good for that, because port casks, it's that dark fruit, it's that sweetness, it really works.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And it can make it just a really good product with a younger, basically age-stated, and most of them don't age-state because it's over 4 years, but, not every 4 to 6 year barrel is going to be good. But if you can put a blend together that's decent and then finish it in a Mizunara cask, which is from Japan, or you can do a port cask or a cognac cask or something like that, then you can take something that maybe wouldn't have sold very well on its own, but because you added a finish to it and let it sit for X amount of months, however long that may be, and then all of a sudden it turns into something else, right? It's like taking a basic chicken breast that you grilled on the grill, but if you add the right sauce to it, all of a sudden it's a fantastic dinner, right? Instead of just a plain old chicken breast, right? So it's that same kind of idea where you can do it with cigars, and you can do it with cheeses and everything else. But yeah, these are all really good. I would just say before we go that there are different levels. And if you don't want to invest hundreds of dollars into different double oaks or different toasted barrels, in general, like the Elijah Craig toasted is going to be on the lighter side of that, right? And then I would say if you go into the Old Forester 1910, that's going to ramp up the flavor a bit more.
What's nice about the Old Forester 1910 is that it's extremely easy to find.
Yeah, everybody's pretty much got it. Same with the Woodford double oak. Now this is going to be a much richer, more
like you said, Sunday breakfast.
Yeah, it's the fat kid whiskey. It's nice and sweet. You get the dark fruits. You get almost the fig notes. The Trails N10 is kind of in a league of its own. The Angel's Envy is kind of, especially the cask strength, is in a league of its own. And if you can find the Peerless double oak, that's phenomenal.
Of course, I would wish you good luck in finding the Peerless.
Yeah, and it's also at 110 proof. So you're bumping up the proof.
Indeed.
Along with a double oak product, where these two, actually these three are going to be pretty similar in proof.
For newbies, you'd recommend go Elijah Craig, 1910, and then...
If you've never had it, that's the order I would go. If you can find the toasted Elijah Craig, that's a good intro, because it's not super complex and super rich, but it's a fantastic product. The 1910 you can find at most places, and I think it's about a $60-ish bottle. And then the Woodford double oak, depending on where you're at, can be, you're going to pay whatever you're going to pay. But that's the order I would go. And then, like I said, once you get accustomed to that, if you really want to step up in proof, if you can find the Peerless double oak, I've never had it, but the 13th Colony, they have a cask strength double oak.
Do they really?
It's a $200 bottle at retail. If you can, I haven't found it.
Let me get right on that.
Yeah, in 10 years, I haven't found it. But they do a really good job with their double oak products. And then if you want to branch out and get into cognac cask finishes, get into port cask finishes, sherry cask finishes, at least here in the state of Texas, like you can walk into most liquor stores and find like the TX line, which is a wheated bourbon that doesn't really taste like a wheated bourbon, but they do sherry, port, and cognac offerings.
I remember that when
we tried it at the distillery. Yeah. So you can try all three of those and then see, especially if you understand the difference between what a good port is, what a good cognac is, what a good sherry is, and then see how that influences.
Port is dark fruit, cognac I find is more stone fruit going into citrusy flavor.
Yeah, it's because it's a white grape. Yeah.
Indeed. And then
sherry.
Sherry. I don't know a lot of fancy words for
it's
sherry.
It's just on the lighter side of port, from the way I understand.
That's a good way of describing it. The lighter side of port.
The lighter side of port.
Anyway, toasted barrel is delicious.
Yeah, and if you haven't had it, you should try it, and then try different offerings and see which one you like.